Hey everyone, we are now on part three and we're reading on the subject of the incarnation of Christ. To continue on with the book of Stephen J. Wellum on his doctrine of Christ, particularly on God the Son incarnate. By the time Jesus comes onto the scene, the identification of the man of God's promise has become more specific even as the anticipation of his appearance has become more desperate. As God progressively revealed himself through his covenants with Adam, Noah, Abraham, Israel, and then David, it became clear that God himself would have to act in order to redeem humanity and restore creation to the coming of his own kingdom. But the covenantal developments also revealed that the man, a son, the king, must redeem humanity through suffering to then reign over a restored creation as God's righteous vice regent and faithful covenant partner. A man must come to represent God on the earth. A man must live in covenant obedience to God. A man must bear the covenant curse on behalf of a disobedient humanity. And a man must rule with the character of God over the earth. The New Testament presents Jesus as this man. He is the true image of God in Colossians chapter 1 verse 15 and Hebrews chapter 1 verse 3. The promised offspring of Abraham in Galatians chapter 3 verse 16. The obedient Son of God in Hebrews chapter 5 verses 7 and up to 10. The great high priest in Hebrews chapter 1 or rather chapter 5 verses 1 to 10 and chapter 7 verses 1 to 28. The great Davidic king in Matthew chapter 1 verse 1, and the last Adam in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse 45, comparing with Romans chapter 5 verse 15. The typological trajectories that come through the Old Testament terminate in one who can stand in the place of sinful humanity, yet without sin, sympathize with the weakness and temptations of humanity, and provide the model life for a redeemed humanity. Jesus could fulfill these roles only as one who was fully human. In the previous chapter, we discussed the biblical emphasis on the Son's eternal ontology and function. But because God requires a man to fulfill his plans and purposes for his creation, the New Testament also insists on the Son's incarnational ontology and function. The eternal Son of God became a man to accomplish the will and plan of God as a man. In the rest of this chapter, we will examine the full humanity of Christ by considering the biblical presentation of the incarnation, the biblical rationale and reasons for the incarnation, and the necessity of Jesus' sinlessness during his incarnation. Now, on the biblical presentation of the incarnation, the scriptures present us with the real enfleshment of the eternal Son who now has a full and complete human nature. The New Testament does not equivocate on this truth or leave the humanity of Christ as a matter of implication. The Gospels lay the foundation for the incarnation. The Word became flesh in John chapter 1 verse 14. John even ascribes the spirit of Antichrist to anyone who does not confess that Jesus has come in the flesh, taken from 1 John chapter 2 verse 2. Paul teaches that Jesus accomplished his reconciling work in his body of flesh in Colossians chapter 1 verse 22, comparing with Ephesians chapter 2 verse 14, in the word or in the phrase in his flesh. In that, in sending his Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, God condemned sin in the flesh in Romans chapter 8 verse 3. Now, Peter speaks of Christ as dying for us in the flesh in 1 Peter chapter 3 verse 18 and comparing with chapter 4 verse 1. And according to Hebrews, Christ was made lower than the angels and shared in our humanity in order to bring many sons to glory. Hebrews chapter 2, verses 9 to 10 articulated. The entire weight of the New Testament then bears witness to the genuineness of Jesus' humanity. Moreover, the New Testament tells us much about the fullness of Jesus' humanity. With so much biblical data to consider, it will be helpful to look at the human nature of Christ according to his outer life, on his physical, functional, and his inner life, mental and emotional, spiritual life. Now, on the outer life of Jesus demonstrates that he had a body and grew and developed like all other human beings. For example, Jesus spoke of his body, head, hands, feet, blood, and bones before and after his resurrection. We can also see them on Matthew chapter 26, verse 12. Matthew chapter 26, or rather in Matthew chapter 26, verses 26 to 28. And in Mark chapter 14, verse 8, and Luke 7, 44 to 46, 22, verse 20, in Luke 24, 39, John 6, 53 up to 56, comparing it with John chapter 19, verses 34 and 37. Jesus was born like all human babies, even though his conception was unique. Luke chapter 2, verse 7. He grew from childhood to adulthood, both physically and mentally. In Luke chapter 2, verse 40. And he suffered in his body and died. Matthew 27, 32 to 61 stated it. Mark 15, 21 to 47, Luke 23, 26 to 56, and John chapter 19, verses 28 to 42. The so-called apocryphal Gospels offer fanciful details to fill in the gaps in Jesus' childhood. These writings, however, come well after the New Testament era and go far beyond the New Testament narrative. Even though we have little data regarding Jesus' childhood, what the New Testament authors were authorized to say presents Jesus undergoing the normal stages of human development. He was born as an infant in Luke 2:16, grew into childhood, Matthew 2:11 and 14, and also in verse 16 of Matthew chapter 2, and also in on verses 19 to 23 of Matthew chapter 2 as well. Luke chapter 2, verse 39 also stated it. Entered his teenage years in Luke chapter 2, verses 42 to 43, and then developed into a grown adult of about 30 years in Luke 3:23. Now, Philip Ibsen observes how the Gospels view Jesus' human development as similar to that of his cousin John, as John the Baptist grew and became strong in spirit in Luke 1:18. So the child Jesus grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him in Luke 2:14. Then as he grew from boyhood to manhood, he increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man in Luke chapter 2, verse 52. Not only so, but Luke's presentation is very reminiscent of the descriptions of the growth of the Old Testament figures such as Isaac and Ishmael in Genesis chapter 21, verse 8 and 20. Samson in Judges 13:24, and particularly Samuel was both in stature and in favor with the Lord and also with man in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 26. Now, the Apostle Paul emphasizes the human birth, descent, and role of Christ. In Galatians chapter 4, verse 4 speaks of Jesus being born in nomenon out of egg or a woman rather than through dia or her. Paul uses the preposition egg to stress that in this birth, Jesus did not merely use Mary's humanity, as an instrument for entering the world, but shared in her human nature so that he would live as all Jewish men born under the law. Verse 4 of Galatians chapter 4, letter B. Similarly, in Romans chapter 1, verse 3, it tells us that the Son was descended or genomino from egg, seed, spermatos of David according to the flesh. Now, Paul again uses the preposition egg to deliberately affirm Jesus' human nature. He is a man who belongs to and shares in the same lineage as David's descendants. And Paul both assumes and explains the importance of Jesus' humanity when he compares the one-man Adam and the one-man Jesus Christ, taken from Romans 5:14-16, also in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 21. And in his confession that there is only one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus, in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 5, and also in Acts chapter 17, verse 31. So we can conclude with Wells that these affirmations appear to rule out any possibility that Paul's view of Jesus was that he was in any way less than fully human. The author of Hebrews then presents the human life of Jesus. The author presents the Son in the most exalted of terms, but he also insists on Christ's full humanity. Jesus was from the tribe of Judah in Hebrews 7:14 and was tempted like us, yet without sin in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15. He learned obedience as we do in Hebrews chapter 5, verse 8, and he took on our flesh and blood in Hebrews chapter 2, verse 14. In order to become our perfect high priest and accomplish our eternal salvation in Hebrews 2:17-18, 5:1-10, 7:1-28. Now, moreover, the author stresses that the Son was made like his brothers in every respect in Hebrews 2:17, and that he learned obedience through what he suffered in Hebrews chapter 5, verse 8. It was precisely this human development that qualified Jesus to become the human priest and covenant mediator required to reconcile man to God. Taken from Hebrews chapter 8, verses 6, and chapter 9, verse 15, and also in verse 24 of chapter 9, and also on chapter 12 of Hebrews, verse 24. And that ends our reading on this part 3 on the incarnation of Christ, and part 4 will commence sooner. And I'm hoping that you are enjoying our reading, and we will, I will see you soon for our next reading. Once again, God bless everyone, and have a pleasant day to all of us.